By the way, thank you for a great first session. I appreciate the level of engagement. And this is some of the meat and potatoes time now, understanding the language and then looking at the actual proposals, right? Now, for those of you who have never written a proposal, I didn't think of adding this, but I do have permission from a few of my graduate students to share proposals that they have written that I've evaluated from two perspectives. One, as a grant reviewer myself, and also as a person who teaches this, And so I do have samples of what I consider really well-written proposals that will cover all the components that we are going through today. I did not include those in the packet because the packet is already long, with 130 slides and then the other material to it. It's quite long, but if you are interested in that, just reach out to our office and I'll be sure to get something over to you. And I have business cards here as well, and I have more. I have both the county and the university card. Either one gets me just the same, so doesn't matter. Feel free to reach out, all right? So as I mentioned earlier today before we started our break, people tend to be a little intimidated with the prospect of writing a proposal, in part because it's a novel way of thinking, and in some ways it's a novel way of writing, right? I want to show you an extract from an old course syllabus for one of my courses on grant writing, and I changed the syllabus. This is no longer in it, but I wanted to show it to you anyway because it sort of brings something into perspective we're talking about. I had this in the course syllabus up until about maybe 2 years ago, and it says, during a presentation at a philanthropy conference, a representative of a well-known national foundation began her eagerly anticipated remarks with the following statement: there are many myths about and much mystique surrounding the proposal writing and grant securing aspects of fund development. As a result, there are a number of new and well-established community-based organizations and even some eligible public agencies that are not maximizing their efforts in securing funding for projects that could revitalize many struggling communities. She continued, as a foundation, our purpose for existence is to help break cycles of poverty, curtail health disparities, and change communities for the better. But many community partners have not learned how to engage us in their planning. This is a foundation executive speaking. Some have even said they simply don't know how to make the case that the needs are legitimate. Today, she continued, I am here to demythologize the funding process and demystify grant writing, right? And I've used that sort of like as my guide as to what I aim to accomplish with this particular session. I want you to be able to walk away understanding how it works and to make it as simple as possible. So I'm going to begin by going through in alphabetical order some of the key terms that you will encounter as you look at writing proposals or in the fund development sphere in general. I'll start with some of the ones that are fairly innocuous and then some that are a little more detailed. An abstract, for example. And this is generally a 150 to 300 word summary of a proposal. Now, an abstract can have a slightly different meaning than in certain settings. For example, when we're looking at an abstract for an academic research, it may have different parameters than it would in writing a proposal. But generally, it is a summary. I will point out that the abstract, even though it often appears at the beginning of a document, is still not an introduction to the document. It is generally the very last thing that is written when you are writing a proposal or any research product for that matter. So the abstract, even though it appears at the beginning, is typically the last thing that is written. The next one I want to call your attention to is an annual gift. An annual gift is simply a reference to a generally unrestricted gift made each year by a donor to a community-based organization or to a foundation. And it is annual simply because it's yearly, right? And the term unrestricted refers to the fact that the gift that is made is not restricted in its use insofar as how the organization may spend it, right? And I'm going to go over here because every time I move away for some reason, my tablet is dropping the slides. So I want to talk next about a bequest. And a bequest is simply a gift that someone leaves to an organization, right, through a will. So a wealthy donor passes away and leaves a bequest to the organization. I think most of us know what a board of directors would be, and that's the governing body of the typical nonprofit organization. But I want to talk briefly also about a block grant. You'll hear this a lot. You heard me refer earlier to a county-operated block grant called the Community Development Block Grant. And what that means is that it's funding that is given categorically as opposed to individual cost centers. It is given categorically for distribution. The concept of a block grant in many ways dates back to the Reagan administration. I've lived long enough now that when I refer to the Reagan administration, it's not what I've read in books, but what I lived through. Right, yeah. Sometimes I talk to my students who are generally younger in their 20s and 30s, and they're looking at me like, okay, if you say so, buddy. All right? But during the Reagan administration, the federal government introduced a different relationship, a different financial relationship with the states. So prior to the Reagan administration, what would happen is that federal dollars were appropriated based on requests that the states made to the federal government. And it was done in like this. They would say, we want X amount for Medi-Cal, for example, for the state of California, X amount for this, X amount for that. When the Reagan administration came along, they said, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to restrict you like that. We're going to give you a block of money, and you will determine how to distribute it. Thus, the birth of the categorical block grant. What they didn't tell is that the block grant was less in dollar amount than the individual line items that used to be given, right? So the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant, is one that comes to states and counties and cities for distribution. And when you see a block grant, that's what it is, right? Boilerplate. When we talk about a boilerplate, we're actually just talking about a template of sorts that you may use over and over again in the grant writing process. I want to just issue a word of caution. Boilerplates are fine, but what you don't want to do is just simply replicate the same thing and send to multiple funders. Bad idea. Do you know why? A lot of grant reviewers review for more than one organization. And I've seen the same proposal cross my desk for 2 different entities. And it is embarrassing to say the least, right? So boilerplates are fine, right? Oh, by the way, talking about the world of AI, and I embrace the use of artificial intelligence. I realize the reality of where that's going. If you were to look at the course syllabuses for my class, and I'm teaching during the upcoming fall, 3 graduate sections of research methods and a healthcare finance course as well. And in my syllabus, I've added a little clause that says, I recognize that the use of AI has real-world implications. And it would be therefore foolish for me to pretend that you're not going to use it. Therefore, you may utilize AI to enhance your work, but no more than 20% of the content of your paper may be the product of generative AI. I'm giving you a chance to have AI revise it, make tweaks, add a few sentences here and there, at the same time making sure that you are clear and you understand what you should be doing. And that's just the reality, that's just the reality of it. But I say this in the context of boilerplates because we saw a resume, a cover letter from an applicant for position, and the cover letter said, "Dear company," in brackets. Right? No, actually it says, "Dear insert company name," in brackets, right? Right? And then at the end, where, when it should have the person's signature, it said, "Your signature here." And that's what they sent accompanying their resume for an application for position. Now, clearly somebody had AI do the work for them and they didn't have the good sense to fill in the blanks. right? So be careful with those boilerplates and make sure that they are, in fact, appropriate. Bridge funding. Bridge funding is generally funding that is provided to a nonprofit on an interim basis. And I'll give you an example of how a bridge funding program may work. Let's say, for example, you have developed a program and the operating budget for that program is $200,000 for a 12-month fiscal year that begins on July 1 and ends on June 30th of the following year. But there were some emergent needs, including a larger than anticipated client base that drew on your services, and so now you find yourself at the end of month 9 and 1 quarter remaining and you don't have enough money. You can apply it to certain organizations who will say, you know what, you've run a successful program, you have additional costs, we will bridge the gap of that time for the remaining 1 quarter of the year to complete it. The good thing about bridge funding is that they often already give credit for the good work that you're doing. The bad thing about bridge funding is that organizations often don't realize they need it until very late in the funding cycle when most grantors have already done their appropriations for that fiscal year, right? But there's a possibility that you can do that because it is out there. This one I want to talk about is what is called a bidders conference. A bidders conference is really a grant information conference that most grantor agencies will hold. At that bidders conference, they will announce the details of the requirements for the grant. They will announce the process for application. They will tell you what's needed, deadlines, and so forth. They'll give you sample files in terms of budgets and so on that you may need. They do provide those. We hold a bidders conference in the spring for the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund. The next one we will have will be next March for fiscal 26-27, right? We've already done appropriations for fiscal 25-26. The Los Medanos Healthcare Grant Program we talked about earlier, they also have a bidders conference. They're on a slightly different cycle. And most grantor agencies have bidders conferences because we want you to understand what is required, right? So when we do our bidders conferences, I walk through in intricate detail what is expected. I even give out a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet with a template for a sources and uses budget, things like that, because I know those things are very difficult for some smaller organizations to put together. So bidders conferences are good. In fact, we have a rule that if you don't attend the bidders conference, you cannot apply. And a lot of organizations have that requirement. Even the state of California does. And I think that's important. Capital funding. This is really an accounting term and not restricted to just grant writing. When we talk about capital expenditure, we're talking about costs surrounding the, buildings, constructions, facilities. Now, in some accounting circles, and this is debatable, in some accounting circles, they include certain items as capital expenditure that I don't agree with. For example, I saw one budget where a copy machine was listed as a capital expenditure. I don't agree with it from a fiscal standpoint, but they did anyway, right? You'll see sometimes when a van will be listed as a capital expenditure. But most definitely, what's not debatable are things like a building, constructing a building, a facility, expanding a wing. Those are capital costs, and that's across the board in most accounting settings. So when we talk about capital funding, we need to be aware that a lot of grantor agencies do not fund capital projects. That's why this is so important, all right? So people often say, well, central to our program is building that new wing. So if the grantors are not going to do it, well, you just have to look for the ones that do. But I'm saying the typical foundation does not, right? We often say to people, what we don't fund, we can look at your sources and uses budget. And if you can go to the other grantor and ask them if they will cover that, then you can shift their costs over to us. So there are ways sometimes to shuffle things around, right? As a general rule, we'll talk about this when we cover grant budgeting this afternoon. As a general rule, by the way, most grantor agencies will allow you to shift line items within categories, but not outside of categories. Here's what I mean. Let's suppose you have budgeted in your grant program to fund 4 FTEs, full-time equivalents in terms of your positions. That may be 4 persons, or it could be 8 persons, each of them half-time, beside the point. But you've decided you're going to fund 4 FTEs. But you had someone leave in the middle of the program, and you have about 4 months of salary savings, right? Most grantor agencies will allow you to shift the savings from that person, that one line item, to another line item within personnel costs, because it's the same category. They will not allow you to shift from personnel to operations and vice versa. Most cases they don't. For the Keller Canyon grant program that I have day-to-day oversight for, all we require is that we allow the shift, but you just have to call us and ask permission. And then we get our staff to write up the notes and saying we are authorizing this shift, because we are interested in the community-based organization delivering the service, and we understand that the dynamics do change. That's just the reality of it. The dynamics do change, right? So let's keep that in mind. There's a code I have in here called a CAGE, right, which is a government code. And I put this here because if you are applying for federal dollars, this becomes actually important. And it's a 5-character number that the federal government requires you to use to identify a particular facility. So let's say, for example, we are writing a proposal for a homeless shelter. Contra Costa County, we have more than one, right? Let's say, for example, our youth shelter, which is over in West County, Cali House, versus our interim adult shelter over here in Concord. The cage number requires you to identify each facility separately with a separate number. If you're applying for federal money, you will need that. Similarly, if you're applying for federal money, you will need a DUNS number, and I'll talk about that momentarily as well. Okay, challenge grant. A challenge grant is basically a grant that is provided on the basis that you, who have received the money, you're able to raise additional funding sources. Let me be clear, this is not a matching grant. They're two different things. A challenge grant is simply a provisional grant. So I will say to you as the grantor, I will give you $10,000 to enhance that program if you can raise the additional $20,000 for the program. That's not a match, but it's conditional. Your ability to access my $10,000 is contingent on you raising your $20,000. Whereas a match grant will say for every dollar that you raise, I will give you $1. That's the difference, right? We talked about foundations earlier. I won't spend a lot of time on the community foundation. We talked about corporate foundations, but not a whole lot. So let me talk about it. Corporate foundations versus a corporate donor program. So here's a little secret. I don't include this. I think it's not in my slides. I don't remember. But I talk about it with my students. A corporation, any corporation, can form a foundation in one of two ways, and it's a corporate foundation. A corporate foundation simply means that the funding for the foundation comes from the corporate profits transferred into the foundation. So let's say, for example, UPS, right? They get their profits and they say, we're going to take out of our profits this year $50 million and transfer it over to the foundation. And the foundation then becomes the arm through which they give their grants. Pretty straightforward. It's corporately funded. A corporate giving program says we'll give directly to the community out of our corporate office and we'll just get a tax write-off. What's the difference? Well, the difference is based on how the organization, how the corporation wants to report for taxes. But there are two ways a corporation can actually establish a foundation. I usually don't talk about this a lot during this seminar, but I'm raising it now because it's important for you to understand. And let me explain. A corporation can say, we're going to form a separate nonprofit, that's the 501c3 corporation, and we'll put our profits into that. Or they can establish what is called a charitable trust under a different section of the Internal Revenue Code. And here is where it gets very interesting. A charitable trust is just as much a foundation as far as you're concerned receiving money. But if I am a donor, it's a different ballgame. If I donate money to a 501c3 foundation, I can write it off on my taxes. But if I donate money to a foundation that's a corporate trust, I can't write it off on my taxes. Only the corporation gets the tax benefit, not the donor. That's the difference. So you may ask yourself, well, why does it even matter? Well, here is how it matters. That part of the Internal Revenue Code came about because it gives corporations a means of shielding their profits from the taxman, using a euphemism, of course. As long as the principal is in the trust, it is non-taxable. Only interest earned on the principal in the charitable trust is taxable. So a corporation could, in principle, earn $100 million a year and lock away 75% in a charitable trust so that its shareholders are smiling all the way to the bank, knowing that it's not being touched by corporate taxes. There's a difference. But the nonprofit 501c3, right? That's a separate corporation that they have to put in money to, and then they have to do reporting to the IRS of how that money is spent using a 990 and so on and so forth. So two different types of corporate foundations, but they're still foundations in every sense of the word. Concept paper. A concept paper is what some funders will ask you to provide. It's not a full-blown proposal. It's like a two-page paper that says, if you were to fund me, or if you were to allow me to, I'd love to submit a full-blown proposal, and this is what I would like to talk about in the proposal. They will say, we like it. No, we don't like it. Don't waste your time with a proposal. Or they may say, we're interested. Let's see more. Now send us a full proposal. Concept paper. The term development, our friend in the back who works for a nonprofit and works in fund development knows this term all too well. It's a very broad term referring not only to grant writing and grant making, but to all means in terms of raising money for nonprofit organizations through different programs. Now, I mentioned this one earlier, the Data Universal Number System. If you're going to apply to the federal government for grants, you have to have a DUNS number. It's issued by Dun & Bradstreet. Right? You have to apply for one and secure one for your organization. You cannot apply without it. This is important. So think of it as the Social Security number if you are an individual. Yes, I know there's a tax ID number for your corporation that's separate, but this DUNS number is required for what you're going to do if you're going to apply for federal grants. An endowment, we talked about this earlier, funds that exist in perpetuity. You don't spend the principal. Executive summary. Shortest way to say what an executive summary is think of it as a longer abstract. It provides a lot more details. Trick question. When given the option to write an executive summary, which can be up to 2 pages, or an abstract, which is typically 1/2 to 1 whole page, which do you think most people choose? How many say the abstract, which is shorter? How many say the executive summary? You're right. And do you know why? Because people are long-winded. They think the more you have to say, the more it is. I remember I was listening to the senator from Georgia, Dr. Warnock, who is also a minister, pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He was talking about the fact that some people just don't know when it's time for the benediction. You know, they feel like they got to keep going. You got the message across, send the folks home to eat now. You don't have to keep preaching, all right? And that's the challenge for a lot of people, right? Most of the proposals I've read, I've rarely ever read one that was just too short. Most times, I'm reading and thinking, get to the point. I've got 50 more to go, right? So make the point, make it succinct, get to it, and move on, right? I think we're clear on what a grant is right now. We've talked about grant making, which is a general field of awarding grants. A grantor is the agency, like a foundation, that provides the grant. The grantee is the recipient. I'm going to skip this because we don't use these much anymore, but I want to come to a couple more here. Letter of inquiry, letter of interest. If you want to explore that a grantor will be interested in looking at your proposal and they don't have an RFP available for it, you can always send a letter of interest saying, would you entertain this? And that's usually a good way to do it. Would you entertain this? Now, you want to write a letter of inquiry that makes a lot more sense? Hello, John. I met you at the bidders conference for X grant program, but we were not one of the applicants. I thought I'd reach out to you to explore if the foundation might be interested in considering a program like this. Here's the situation. We think we can fix it. What do you think? What's different? You're identifying a particular person in the grantor organization, and you've met them before. That's the key. That's why I talked about earlier getting out there and meeting these people so they know who you are, right? And I think that's an important thing, right? A cover letter. Some grantors will require a cover letter, some do not, right? If you're doing federal grants these days, which are all done electronically, they don't require a cover letter, they require you to fill in a data sheet. So then you fill in that data sheet, and that's all that you do. Now, for the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, we don't require a cover letter. We do require you to fill in a data sheet, and I think that's important. I want to talk about this last one here for a moment. We're going to cover this in great detail this afternoon. It is one of the points of greatest confusion with regards to grant budgeting: in kind. In kind refers to anything that is tangible and has value other than cash. Case in point, you are running a program right here in the Ambrose Center, and someone has provided a copy machine for you. You don't have to pay for it. They've provided. That has a dollar value. That's an in-kind contribution to your program and must be accounted for in the budget. You have a retired physician. Notice the language I'm using. You have a retired physician who wants something to do now that she is no longer a physician, and she comes along and volunteers to be a tutor. Tutors normally make $15 an hour, but as a physician, she might have made $400 an hour. You have to identify her services in the budget as in kind. But the question is, based on what number? On what she's doing, not what she's worth. So when you are calculating the value of her contribution, it's not based on what a physician would charge, but what a tutor would charge. That's important. And those are the kind of details we get into in the grant budget when we later on this afternoon. And again, one of those areas that people really struggle with. And one of the reasons that we often send proposals back to a number of our applicants for the Keller program, because the budgets are off, right? And those numbers matter. Those numbers absolutely matter. So we'll talk about that again in greater detail. A logic model. We're going to talk about a logic model this afternoon. We have a policy in the Keller Canyon Grant Program where if you're applying for $5,000 or greater, you must provide a logic model, which I'll show you what it is. It's a visual representation of your program. It's one page. Do you know the first year we implemented the requirement for the logic model, which was probably about 8 years ago, the very first year we did, we got our largest number of grant applications for $4,999. I kid you not. Right? Granted, I showed people how to do it. I don't know why people find it so intimidating, but almost all grantor agencies now require a logic model. All right? And that I will show you this afternoon as well, how that is done. A major gift, this is a subjective term. If you're a large nonprofit, a major gift for you may be $50,000 or greater. If you're a smaller nonprofit, a major gift may be anything over $1. You know, it really depends on the size of your organization, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. Matching grant, I talked about this earlier when I did the other grant. This is what I want to talk about here. I just want to insert this because I think this is important for those of you who work for public agencies, such as the county. Section 501C of the Internal Revenue Code deals with various exempt organizations. What a lot of public agencies don't know is that Section 26 of the Internal Revenue Code 170C1 talks about the possibility of certain categories of public agencies that you can actually give money to and receive a tax benefit. Most people know zero about it. And I didn't too for many years. And actually, I didn't come up with this. I'm not a genius for taxes or anything like that. But I asked a friend of mine who worked in the city of Oakland's city attorney's office, Patrick Tang, years ago. because we were reaching out on behalf of the city and asking for money, and everybody would say, "Oh, we don't give to taxing entities. We don't give to government agencies." And I said, "Patrick, we need to find a way around this." And he did the research and came back saying, "Actually, you may want to show them this." And voila, it worked, right? But again, not all public agencies fall under this, but I just want you to be aware of it. A couple other very common, remember we talked about those acronyms this morning? The first one is a NOFA. Notice the funding availability. This is used largely by government agencies. Almost all foundations and local grantors will use an RFP or an RFQ, request for proposals, request for qualifications, etc. The government has to go big. And these days, well, I'll leave that alone, right? NOFA. And then when they want to go real big, they say, we're releasing a super NOFA. Have you heard that expression before? Yeah, we're releasing a supernova. Yeah, okay. Sounds like a star exploding. Request for concept papers, request for information, request for proposals, request for qualifications. By the way, there's a database also if you're applying federal money called the System for Award Management. This actually is where you manage your grant once you receive it. So you have to have all those other numbers we talked about to access the SAM system. Just something for you to be aware of. If you don't apply for federal grants, then that's about the key. Let me stop there before we start talking now, the rest of our time, about the actual proposal. Before we go in, are there any questions on anything we covered so far or anything we covered earlier this morning? You didn't get a chance to ask your question. Now is the time to do so before we move on, and I will take a sip of this Panera coffee. Any questions, comments? Over here, please. Thank you. Pastor Chantel, it's good to see you. All right.
Lynette Williams with the Public Defender's Office. How do you go about speaking to funders when you are shy? Say you don't have that, you mentioned walking up and or sending a letter saying, I met you at this conference or whatever, but you're too shy to go up and have that conversation. How do you broach, meeting people?
Yeah. And that's a bit of a tricky question. And I'm not sure it necessarily has to do with shyness. In some ways, that reflects the perceived inaccessibility of the funders if you have to think twice about whether or not they're approachable. And it's something I speak at conferences throughout the year, different places, and and it took me a while to get to the point where I'm realizing that, yes, you're speaking all day, yes, you may be a bit tired, but it really just takes a moment to be kind and listen. Right? So there is that piece. One of the other things I suggest to people is that approach in a group. It's like you're sitting at a table. Instead of, if you are shy about approaching them, say, hey, we have a question. There's always strength in groups. I think that makes a big difference. But more than that, it tells us that more than one person is interested right now in talking. Let me pay some attention to this, because the benefits of my response may extend beyond just a single person. So that's one way to sort of cover yourself with the group. Another way of asking questions, approaching, and we have done this in the past, is ask them, is there a way I can write my question and have someone on staff maybe take it to be asked? That's another way to get around a face-to-face type of verbal conversation, to write your question down. And that said, by all means, feel free to write. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. You have a note and send it up, and we're glad to read that. And so that's a start, I think. And hopefully that helps. Yes, over here, can we get the microphone over?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, I was just wanted to thank you, first of all, for introducing the feasibility study worksheet. I think that's really good, because in looking at it, I noticed that a lot of the stuff that I've been doing to prepare for the grants is the feasibility study.
Yes, exactly.
And it's like, oh, now I can help other people to help me.
And feel free to distribute anything you got here or online to wherever. It's not proprietary. Knowledge never is. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, because all of the stuff that you mentioned in the previous grant writing seminars, is statement of need, other sources of
Which is coming
other
next, yeah.
collaboration. All that stuff is in the feasibility study. So I encourage everybody to really pay attention to the 2 sheets of paper that he handed out earlier, that he covered earlier, because those things will help you to prepare to write the grants.
Yes. And by the way, folks, that I just created that about 3 days ago. I was thinking, okay, it'll be easier if they have something to take to actually do it, and began to toss some ideas around about creating one. So I've never used it before, but I know it will work because it has all the critical elements in it. Good. Sure, go right ahead. Now let's get a microphone, because otherwise our folks at CCTV will not be able to pick you up, and they want to hear your voice. All right.
So I had a question regarding back corporate funding.
Yeah.
So if you are applying to corporate funding but foresee that there may be potential conflict of interest, and I'm thinking back to an experience I had when I was serving on the student body at Contra Costa College.
Okay.
And we had funding from Chevron, and one of our student body students wanted to speak out on climate and air pollution.
Oh boy.
And
I see where it's going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they were basically kind of halted from doing that and starting that conversation.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, when applying to corporate funding, if there is foreseeable conflict of interest, should we still apply? Do you encourage us to still dig into those pots of money, or kind of still?
You know, my answer is both a short and a long one. The short one is, if it requires in your thinking or your organization's thinking a moral or ethical compromise, then perhaps not. If it requires merely a willingness to accept that there are differing opinions around a particular subject, then maybe you can. See, you're asking a question that I've actually dealt with firsthand. Years ago, I was at Volunteers of America, and this was in the late 1990s, and at that point, the tobacco companies had just lost their court cases and were handing out money. And there was a community health program that Volunteers of America wanted to do, and half the board said, let's apply it to these tobacco companies now that they've got all this money to give. I remember one board member saying, that's blood money. They created the damage with lung cancer and so on. Why would we want their money? And another board member said, well, they caused the damage, let their money fix it. Genuine difference of opinion. They proceeded and applied, and a few board members resigned. All right? There was not a misalignment of value. There were just different ways of acknowledging the set of circumstances around that grant money. Some saw it as blood money. Some saw it as money that you owe us anyway because you did the damage. Right? If it is something like that, to me, it is easier to navigate. But if you're being asked to remain quiet on a moral or ethical issue, such as the damage an oil spill will do, or such as the implications for flaring in a community and the levels of pollution and compromise with health. If it has to do with the fact that, like in Bay Point here for many years, the water company that holds the water franchise did not fluoridate the water, yet they charge Bay Point higher than any surrounding community, that's a different ballgame. That's a moral compromise. And then I would say that all money is not good money. That's my position. Yes, over here, please. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to address this is more of a comment, to address the concept of approaching people with shyness. And I was at a workshop last week in Sacramento called Brownfields 101. And one of the speakers repeatedly said, you have to do your homework ahead of time. And, you know, for brownfields, you go to DTSC.
Right.
Department of Toxic
Oh,
Substances.
I'm aware of who they are, believe me.
Just so everybody knows. And and look at their website.
Yeah.
And go to EPA.gov. And
Yeah.
I've done that. They have a whole section on brownfields. And just to say, do your homework ahead of time, and it will give you confidence.
Yeah. We're in a battle with the DTSC now over their proposal to allow toxic material to be dumped in the Keller landfill. Yes. So, we are aware of who they are. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. I don't know, Professor, Doctor.
Oh, whatever makes you happy.
I'm used to calling him Davey, so.
That's fine too.
Mr. Gray. I just wanted to say that this actually could just be called preparing to write that proposal.
Yeah.
I'm a contracting officer. This is what I do every day. So I wanted to just say to you all, as you're writing this down, hold it up just a little bit. No, up. As you're writing this down, I will say to you, as a contracting officer, I work on mostly federal and some state. I'm on the other end. So I'm reading your proposals. I'm awarding the contracts, and I will just say most of them suck. And I'm using the most scientific term possible. And, everything that David is telling you is, it's very enlightening, and I'm sitting back here and I'm smiling. I think the one term that I didn't see was the NAICS code, which is the,
yes.
So I think maybe I wanted you to just maybe say something about the NAICS code, and then SAM, I saw you put SAM up there. Most people are afraid of SAM, the System for Award Management, so I think I wanted to just prompt you to tell them why that's necessary, the SAM .gov registration.
You're talking, fire away, keep going.
Okay, so listen, let me just say this. When someone tells you to register in SAM, register in SAM. I know that a lot of companies are hesitant to register in SAM, but we can't pay you if you don't register in SAM.
That's right.
You don't put that financial information in there, make it visible. Most of us cannot award contracts to people who are barred from doing business with the federal government. That's the only way that most of us can check to make sure you're not barred from doing business with the federal government, and we can't cut that PO or that invoice. So, or we can't pay that invoice. And so you have to register, and it is a 30 to 45-day process. So if you only register when you see the request for proposal, the invitation for bid, the request for quotes, if you only register when you see that, you're not going to be, we're not going to be able to see it.
Your time will run out.
So
Absolutely.
my request to any of you is, it's great for grants, but the reality is, as David is telling you right now, not everybody's going to get that grant. So take all of this information, soak it all in today, but also take all of this information, is so valuable, and apply this for the proposals that you're also applying for. Apply it to the requests for quotes that you're also applying for, the invitations for bids, especially for those of you who are looking for services. And I wanted to say this early into the day so that you don't think this is only for grants. This is also, as he said, for RFPs, for RFQs, for invitation for bids. All of this information is so valuable for the services you're providing to the community. Every one of these steps he's telling you is applicable for the services you provide and for bringing money into your organization. But you have to dot the I's and cross the T's. And again, this resource is, I have to tell you, from the other side, as a person who's looking at it, you can't buy this, and you can't go on Google and AI and get it, because people like me, I can tell the difference. So, es todo. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So, there's so much that goes in, and I know there are people who say, oh, just get to what I should put in my proposal. Well, I may get to that, and you don't get it anyway because you haven't done the preparation, right? So I know that seems a little tedious getting there, but fine. We'll just dive in and look quickly at proposals for a moment, and we'll spend the next hour or so working on this. And I want to start with this right here. And I'm going to read from the slide, which I rarely ever do. While there are diverse styles of writing proposals, the principles that make for a great proposal are common across various writing styles and proposal types. So I want to introduce something I usually do. I think it's in the fall. In the fall, I do, for the university an academic writing for graduate students workshop. And I often talk about this, and then I realize how vital it is for writing proposals as well. And so I'm going to talk about this here momentarily. And I want to talk about writing as art and writing as science. And you may say, well, what the heck does that have to do with writing a proposal? Everything. Everything. Now, when we were writing as art, or we're doing artistic writing, we're focused on a couple elements. One, the emphasis is more on style. You can say flair, right? You can say flair. And I often give this example to my grad students. A graduate student was writing for a public administration course, and that graduate student had an undergraduate degree in English from UC Berkeley, and now studying for a master's degree in public administration. And I picked up the paper, and I started reading, and the student said, "The sun danced across the sky." And I remember I smiled at it, and, you know, what can I say? I'm a cheeky Caribbean man, and so I simply scribbled in the margin, "In certain artistic writing, the sun dances. In public administration, the earth rotates." Right? And, you know, it's not that what the student wrote was bad. It was the context in which it is written. So writing as art focuses on style and creativity. And by nature, it is evolutionary, which means what was considered artistic 20 years ago might not be considered artistic now. I was the other day thinking about how even the English language has evolved. There were words when I was growing up, as a person who was born in a British colony. When I was growing up, right, gift, the word gift, G-I-F-T, was always a noun. Now I hear people saying, "She gifted me that." And I'm like, what the heck? What happened to English? When did that happen? Right? And I'm thinking, okay, something wrong with me, and I'm realizing that the language has evolved. Right? The language has evolved to include colloquialisms as a part of the standard everyday language now. Right? And so in artistic writing, there is an evolution that takes place, just like in music. Right? Just like in music. You know, what was considered on the edge and cutting edge. You remember when hip-hop first hit the American scene, it was considered far out there music. Now everybody is into hip-hop, right? So again, you know, it evolves over time. And then, of course, artistic writing, writing as art, is subjective. Very subjective. The language is often superfluous in some ways, very general, and meant to create, you know, certain illusions, if you will. But writing as science, and I want to say, when I say writing as science, I am distinguishing that from a genre of writing that is scientific writing, which means writing scientific reports as a result of research. That's not what I'm talking about. But writing as science speaks to principled writing that stands in distinction to writing as art, which is very varied. And why is this important? I'll show you in a minute. Because when we are writing as science, the first thing is that the language is very precise. The language is very precise. And so when we're writing as science, the sun never dances across the sky. Right? It's just that the earth always rotates. The two are essentially saying the same thing, but for different audiences. All right? The other thing is that writing as science is very ordered. By that I mean it follows a specific pattern. Now, I'd be the first to admit that the term ordered is in itself somewhat of a subjective term. And I illustrate order this way. If I started counting and I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fairly ordered, right? Would you say that's ordered? Okay. How about this? 1, 10, 2, 9, 3, 8, 4, 7. Am I still ordered? Yes, I am. I'm just differently ordered. I'm following a very structured pattern. I'm going from the minimum to the maximum, then the next minimum to the next maximum, next minimum. That is still ordered. And I use that illustration to say, when we talk about ordered writing and writing a science, I'm not saying that the order has to be a sequential order. I'm simply saying it has to be a clearly identifiable pattern in which data is presented. That's all I'm trying to illustrate here for you. So it is ordered, and this is important. Writing a science is normative in nature. By that I mean it is not generally evolutionary, though there's some change from time to time. It is normative, meaning it's set to a certain set of principles that you follow. All right? And finally, writing a science is always empirical. It is based on data, it is based on research, and the research and the findings must be replicable. They can be replicated. So the claims that you make in a proposal and the style that you embrace for writing a proposal is writing as science, not writing as art. That's important, right? That's important. Now, I've read, like I said, lots of proposals over the years, and, you know, many of them are quite good, and then others that are not so good, right? But in reality, one of the shortcomings that I do see from time to time is the inability to explain to the reader how you arrived at a conclusion. How you got to this point where you think this is the solution to a particular problem. How were you able to identify that there's a legitimate problem? How did you measure it? How will you apply the solution that you're advancing, and how will you measure that you are being successful? What are the outcomes? How are they measured? Ultimately, what are the impacts to the target population that you want to serve? Right? Those are areas that are significant areas that we need to address. Now, as you're preparing to write, I always say to people, have these types of things on hand. And I won't go through all of them. I've put on here some things that you will need to keep on hand if you're going to set about writing a proposal that will come in very handy because you'll use them more than one time. Boilerplate, successful proposals, unsuccessful proposals, the ones you wrote that didn't get anywhere. Keep them for comparison. Demographic data. We look for demographic data in our proposals. And the federal scorning of DEI notwithstanding, in local circles, we look to see what vulnerable populations you're actually attempting to serve. We want to see that you're serving persons of color. We want to see that you're serving youth, children, women, Asian Americans, Latinos. We want to see all of that. So we need the demographic data that you will pull. And that is where, and let's get our microphone back here, that is why we always need you to keep your demographic data as to who you serve on hand. Please go right ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for talking about the information. I've been running into the issues at times because we've received a list of different terms to use to not talk about certain populations due to what's going on currently with the administration. Can you talk a little bit about that, so just how I can write around that? Like, what could I possibly do?
It depends on who you're writing to. And again, if you're writing to the federal government, that's one thing. If you're writing to local agencies, I'm not sure that is as much as a problem unless that local agency is receiving federal money and has its own restrictions as well, right? So we have talked about how we begin to phrase things in such a way that, you know, people do not, and so what we've done, we've classified certain populations as, we don't use terms like minority populations. Some people have even stopped using persons of color. And what they've done is identified populations with service deficits is one that is being used a lot these days. See, that could be any population. that has a service deficit. In other words, there's a disparity between the level of the problem in that population and the level of the service being provided. So if you're saying our service is going to be targeting those with a service deficit in this particular arena, and that service deficit needs to be framed in such a way that it doesn't somehow allow people to discriminate against your target population. The other part is, one of the things that I think nonprofits also need to work at is how to better anonymize data. So some of the data you're collecting is from direct client intervention strategies. And so one of the challenges you have is to strip out certain personal identifiers or use identifiers that are unique to your corporation that only you can make the match, right? I serve on the California State University East Bay Institutional Review Board. And what that board does is a federally mandated board that reviews all human subject research. So essentially, our board receives proposals from students and faculty who want to do research involving human subjects. And my job is to check the proposed research for ethical compliance with federal laws and things like that. So, for example, an individual submitted to the IRB a proposal meant to evaluate, and I remember talking with my colleague Armando about this, meant to evaluate how immigrants feel about the level of interaction they have with their local school districts. And the person proposed in the research proposal that came to the IRB to record the sessions they were having with these individuals. And as an immigrant myself, well, number one, and two, as a researcher and as a person serving in the IRB, and I teach research methods, the first thing that came to my attention is, why would you in this climate want to record individuals who may be undocumented, to create a record to ask them about how they actually interact with their school district, when in fact there is nothing that will protect what you've recorded from a subpoena or a court order? Why would you create the record in the first place? And the person proposing the research was a doctoral student, and boy, were they upset because I kept rejecting it. And I sent it back multiple times, and it delayed that research by about 6 months, and they were very angry. They couldn't get what I was asking them to do. They kept saying, nobody will know their names. And I'm like, you're not getting it. It doesn't matter that nobody will know their names. You are recording them talking, acknowledging that they're undocumented, and telling on video how they interact or what they like or don't like about the school district. It makes no sense. Well, we get them to sign a release. Doesn't matter. And I did not approve and authorize the research until we got to the point where they said they will ask in advance, if you want to be excluded, we will not record you at all. I said, that's all I was asking. All right? We say that we have to come up with different and strategic ways to protect the populations that we serve. Listen, folks, you can have varying opinions about the whole documented versus undocumented thing, but, you know, as Supervisor John Joyer once said, he's yet to meet a communicable disease that asks your ethnic, racial identity or your immigration status before jumping from one person to another. Right? So you're absolutely correct. We have to come up with strategies, and it's not easy. Yes, I saw one more.
I just wanted to know, when you were talking about the writing as art versus science, should we indicate the pattern of the order?
So it depends on what you're saying. And when we come to the next section, you'll see what I mean. For example, when you are creating one of the critical parts, and I think I talked about this earlier. So let's talk about the proposal, and it may make sense. I want to talk about a number of things, and I'm going to start by going through all of them. We talked about the abstract, the executive summary briefly, but I want to come back and talk about them now. And I'll come to your question. So the first thing that generally will go, that a person will see, is your abstract. And it's a short introduction, right? And it covers some of the important questions, such as, what is the problem? What is the problem you've identified that's leading to the proposal, right? What is the problem? how you propose to fix the problem, how much money you're asking for, and what the measurable outcomes are likely to be. That's essentially the core of the proposal, and that has to be in the abstract. And that is why people struggle to write an abstract, because it's relatively short, and they instead choose to go with the executive summary, which can be 2 pages long. I've written an executive summary once in my life. One time. And it was for the California Department of Education. Jerry Brown was mayor of Oakland of the old days, and I was head of the Office of Strategic Grants and Intergovernmental Affairs, and he came along, as only Jerry Brown can do, and you may have you know the product of this proposal, and he says, I want to start a charter school. I want to start 2 of them, in fact, and he says, I want to start a charter school for the arts and one like a military academy. And he said to me, Fraser, find me some money. And with the help of a young woman named Tora Musgrove, we wrote the initial grants to the Department of Education for the state of California and won $250,000 for each of those 2 charter schools that are still in existence today, right? The School of the Arts, right? And that's the only time I've ever written an executive summary. They were 2 pages long. Right? And if you go searching for them, you can probably still find them online, but that's a 25-year-old proposal now, right? Other than that, I always opt for an abstract, which is shorter and to the point. Now, if you apply for Keller money, your abstract is like 50 words. And it's difficult to do. And then those 50 words in your abstract, should you be granted the money, are extracted from your proposal and put in an order that goes before the Board of Supervisors for approval. So it really has to make the case as to what's coming. Several years back, I had finished taking doctoral comprehensive exams, and we were just, entering dissertation phase. And I remember a woman, Dr. Black, one of my professors, and she says, now that you've gone through the coursework, now it's time to see how well you write. And we had a 1-week intensive. And she said, I want you to come to class ready on the first day of the week with a 5-page summary on a particular topic. We brought the 5-page summary. At the end of the first day, she says, I've read your 5-page summary. I'd like you to come tomorrow when you come back to class, reducing that to 2 pages without losing anything. At the end of day 2, she says, I want you to take that 2-page, see what you got, and let's reduce that down now to half a page. By the time she got through, she says, I want you to make that 5-page statement into a 9-word sentence. It was the most difficult thing in my life. See, what most of you don't know is that before getting into public service eons ago, I used to be a pastor. Did an undergraduate degree in theology, then went to seminary. I know you don't see that in any of my bios, that's all right. And so, as a preacher, I knew how to talk. And talk. And talk. And talk. And so all of a sudden now I'm in a different world when I need to say less. And less has to be more. And that's where the challenge comes in, right? You talked about the challenge when you're a shy person of approaching and saying, hey, I need your ear for a moment. Part of the strategy is taking those 5 pages of thoughts and condensing them into a single 9-word sentence. So that requires preparation, right? When you write a proposal to us in the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund and you come in for an interview, you've got 10 minutes. That's it. 10 minutes to make your case for money. And so there has to be some skill involved in saying fewer things. So then let's talk now away from the abstract, and let's talk about the next aspect of your proposal. So a proposal always has an abstract. The proposal must also have a clearly delineated set of your organization's credentials as it relates to what you're asking to be funded. Let me be clear what I mean by organizational credentials. What I mean is who your organization is. how long they've been in existence, the types of services you've provided, experience you've had in providing the services that you're asking to be funded, qualifications of the personnel in your program. This is really very, very, very important, because let me tell you what happens. Most new organizations will say, well, we are a brand new nonprofit. How do we show organization credentials when we have not been doing this for very long? And this is where the next step comes in, and it has to be very important. Then you need to make sure that your board is comprised of more than Cousin Pookie and Auntie Maria. It needs to be comprised of people who bring the relevant experience. Because even though the organization does not have the experience, and I've seen some of my students do really adept with this, they would say, although our organization is new to this category of service, the chair of the board has 15 years experience delivering this for other organizations. The executive director is a licensed clinical social worker, and though she's been with us for 2 years, she's been doing this type of services for the past 10 years. You rely then on the personnel in the organization and their experience to bolster the organization's lack of experience. That is why, a lot of people say, I want to start a nonprofit. And they got their family members as all the board members, and they can't do jack for you. They don't know how to do fundraising, because board members are supposed to help you bring money in your organization. If you got a board member that's not raising money for you, you're wasting time. That's it. A board member's primary job is to financially bolster your organization, right? And if they can't do that, you've got the wrong board member. So again, as you're looking at your organization's credentials, which are going to be important, and I wish some of you, please do reach out to me to get a sample proposal. You'll see I have some excellent samples students have written about how they established organizations, and you also have their organization's credentials. Then you also have to be able to say, this is who we've partnered with in the past, and this is who we propose to partner with, right? That's going to be a part of your proposal. Now, I want to get next to the next section here good, we're doing good on time. The next section is the most critical part of the proposal. And we're going to spend a little time on this. If this is bad, the whole proposal is bad. It is called the statement of need. And we're going to talk a lot about this, and we're going to try to figure it out, make sure you understand how to create one. Now, I didn't come up with the name statement of need. It's what it's called in the industry, but it's a bit of a misnomer, because some people think a statement means a sentence. A statement of need could be 5 or 6 pages long, depending on what's the case you're trying to make. This is what's central to your proposal. If you don't have this right, everything else goes bad. And if you've done your homework, right, if you've done your homework with the feasibility study, this is going to be easier to write, because you will extract the data from the feasibility study. So let's talk about what exactly a statement of need is, right? And I've tried to condense this into a simple concept. It does more than identify the problem. It states who is affected by the problem. So you identify what the problem is, and your statement of need must indicate who is affected by the problem. So let's do a quick exercise to show you, 1, how to go about doing this, but 2, to demonstrate to you just how difficult it is. I'm going to go back to the old days when someone called the city of Oakland and said, the kids from the local high school, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, they're not in class. They're truants. They're hanging out in front of my community grocery store, my little mom and pop store. They're making a lot of noise, and people don't want to come into the store to buy because they're afraid of these kids. The kids are noisy, they're boisterous. And, this is an issue. Okay, I've given you very limited information. I'd like you to talk to me. Get the microphones. Who is affected by that problem? Who is affected by that problem? In the back. Just give me one.
The school loses funding.
Yes, the school district is affected because schools are funded based on average daily attendance. And if the kids are absent, they're not in school, the school loses money. So that's who is affected by the problem. Who else? One in the front here, please. The students, she said, are affected. How are they affected? They're not in school learning. Right? Yes, right here. Another one. Who else is affected?
The owner of the store.
The owner of the store is affected, the business. So let's get so far. So far we said the school district, and because the school loses money, ADA. We said the students are affected. They're not in school learning. They're on the street corners. Number 3, we said the owner of the business. Who else is affected? Because believe me, there is more. Yes, in the back. The community. How so? Take it up. Take the microphone so we can get it recorded, please. How is the community affected?
The community is affected because they're not being a productive member of society.
Oh, what a broader approach to it. A very broad perspective, saying ultimately the community is affected because the students aren't being prepared to be effective and contributing members of society. What else? Who else is affected? In the back, please, and then we'll come to the front here, Armando. In the back? Yes. Go ahead. No, you go ahead. You have the mic already. Please, fire away.
The police?
Pardon?
The police department, because they have to go and
I'm
check
glad
on the
you're
students?
thinking that way. Most people don't think, because guess what? Yes, the store owner called the police a lot of times that ran out there to kind of get these kids corralled back into school. Very good. Who else is affected?
Parents,
Parents, how?
they're going to be held they should be held accountable for their children being truants.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because guess what? Up until a few years ago, he's no longer the district attorney. The Contra Costa district attorney wanted to charge parents here in this county when their children were truant. Yep, that's right. More. Who else is affected? Teachers. Over here, she said teachers are affected. Well, teachers are there to teach people. They've got to be there to be taught, right? Any more? Who else is affected? Now it's getting harder because you've gotten all the easy ones.
Our future is affected.
Oh, she's getting philosophical back there. Well, yeah, she's a PhD student, by the way. That's by nature, these folks get very philosophical. Our future is affected, yes.
What about like community centers that have like programs for youth that they could be getting those youth to come to their programs instead of being out on the streets?
Absolutely. It creates a greater need on the system to provide alternatives for the students who are obviously going to fall behind. One more.
Companies and their diversity inclusion efforts.
How so?
Because they don't have the skilled employees to hire.
Yeah, overall the employment sector begins to suffer. Do you see the vast array of possible affected parties? The purpose of the statement of need is in part to identify who is affected by the problem. So we can say the problem here is that students are being truant and out of school during school hours. Fine, that's the problem, right? Now we can argue, by the way, that that's symptomatic and not the true problem. Think about it. Okay, but let's say we go along with that. Who is affected? There's a whole lot. And I'll come back to why that becomes important. Let's go to the next thing that must be in your statement of need. And by the way, who is affected is not just a matter of guessing. This must be research-based. It must be research-based. For example, when you say the students are affected, you will need to cite data that shows kids who are high school dropouts what their earning ability is. Data. Right? Data. So the next thing is going to be what factors contributed to the problem. This gets harder. That's part of the statement of need. I'll come to you in a second. So let's talk again. Talk to me. What factors do you think might have contributed to such a problem? Yes, in the back, right here. What factors contributed to what might contribute to this problem? What may have caused it? Let's get a microphone to her, please.
Family relationships or family dynamics?
Yeah, family dynamics may well contribute to why these kids are outside instead of in school. What else? Lots of hands. Go ahead. What are other factors that may have contributed to the problem? I see lots of hands. Let's get the mics over.
What the school may provide.
Meaning?
Say as though if a
kid is not interested into the school because they don't provide what they feel like, say like if they're an artist but they don't have an art program, they're like, I don't want to go to school because it's not fulfilling my future, so I'm gonna be on the street.
Education without relevance to the needs of the kids. Then it's not much of an education, is it? I'm glad you raised that, because whenever I raise that scenario, most people don't want to hold the school accountable. They blame the parents, they blame the kids, they blame everything, but they don't blame the school or the teacher who shows up unprepared, because they're those two. Now, the vast majority of teachers are good, hardworking people, but there are some who don't show up prepared. Yes, more. What else could have contributed to the problem?
Social anxiety, social fear of even going to school, bullying, stuff like that.
Excellent. And funny enough, I don't think I've ever heard anyone contribute that one before. Very good. We have a program we fund at Pittsburgh High through the Rainbow Center for kids who are in the LGBTQ community, and they were being targeted and bullied in school. Right? And it is irrelevant, quite frankly, what you think about that community. Ultimately, they are our children. And all of them, every last one of them, deserve to be protected. Maybe I'm just thinking like a parent, you know, but your kid is my kid. Whatever color they love or hate is irrelevant to me. Your kid is my kid. I think we all want to protect all of our kids. Bottom line. Are you hearing me? Good. What else? What else could contribute to the problem?
We have learning styles and peer pressure.
Yes. The kids may not know, it may not fit into the learning modalities that are in the school. I'm glad you're thinking about this. We have such a large group, it'll be easier if I do it this way than to break you up. It'll take too long. Yes.
The village, where we used to watch out for each other's children. Now these kids can hang out on the street corner and everyone's scared to say something.
Also very true. Very, very true. Thank you. I appreciate that. Over here, we have a few over here. Yes.
Mental health.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's another one I haven't heard anybody said, interestingly enough.
A lot of times the parents and the teachers don't get together and recognize that some of the students may need some additional assistance. They may need an IEP, and no one is paying attention. It's like they have blinders on, so the kids get lost in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes?
I'm going to say positive role models, people taking our time to invest in the children.
Yeah, absolutely. They may not have it. Did you have a question, a comment?
What we're here for, funding and resources.
Limited resources.
And
yes.
training for all the different pockets of the people affected.
Love it. Thank you so much. Two more. Yes, go ahead. We need a microphone for you. Hold a second, and then we'll come back to you over there, all right? Go ahead. Take this one straight down here, please.
The children might have lack of community support, like their family dynamic, like some of them are like, like wards of the court or so they might not want to show up because, of what's going on at home.
Very good point. You would be amazed at the number of kids in the foster care system, where they may have been in multiple homes and other such dynamics that impact education. And in some cases, unfortunately, impact how their peers treat them, and even, unfortunately, how some of the teachers and school administrators teach them. When my now 28, almost 29-year-old son was in high school, I was long teaching at California State University, and I remember him as a young black kid going to school in San Lorenzo, and he told his teacher, my dad teaches over there at Cal State East Bay, and she says, Brian, you need to quit making up stories. Yeah. She said, Brian, you need to quit making up stories. And so my son said to me, she didn't believe me, Dad. And I said to him, well, I wonder why. And I promptly showed up to the school the next week. And I said to her, I am David Fraser. I am Brian Fraser's dad. And I teach at that school up there in the hill. And she was out of her mind with shock, right? Because I knew what the issue was. Because in her mind, this young black kid from San Lorenzo, his father didn't teach at no university. That's what it was. right? So absolutely. So no, we've gone through a lot, right? We've talked about who is affected. We've talked about what the factors are that contribute to the problem. And now we get into the complex part of it as a part of your statement of need. How, based on research, not speculation, based on research, not your opinion, based on research, not what you like, but based on research, what you know and how the problem can be fixed. Because now you're starting to talk about how you think the problem can be fixed, not in a whole lot of detail. This is essentially the statement of need. Who, what, how, all research driven. Now you may say, but wait a minute, we identified a whole lot of who is affected. Hear me carefully now. Although your statement of need will identify multiple affected parties, your proposal just needs to address at least one of the affected parties. That's important. That's important for multiple reasons. Number one, there may be other organizations in that space dealing with some of the affected parties already, right? So you don't have to fix it all. This is important. Your statement of need provides you with a framework of selecting who you're going to target for your service. That's why it begins there. If you don't know who is affected, your proposal is going to be, pardon the colloquialism, crappy. Because there's no way you will know who to target the service to. That's why it always begins there. And then you want to pick and say, okay, we don't have the resources to address all the affected parties, but we have decided to target single parents who have children in high school. This is one of the affected parties. And that could be how your service works. Or you can say, we've decided to target two of the affected parties. We're going to target teachers for educating them with continuing education about how to deal with teenagers. Let me tell you something. I respect, as I've said, I respect teachers in our public school system, in our K through 12 system. I respect teachers quite a bit. But the reality is we've had such a shortage of teachers in the state of California, and in desperation, this state has historically done some things in the education sector that is disturbing, right? So you can come from anywhere in the state of California or out of the state of California. You can have a bachelor's degree in duck raising. As long as you can pass the California Basic Educational Skills Test, you can become a substitute. And if you got the time, they'll give you a one-year contract as a long-term substitute teaching kids, and you know nothing about education and educating. So when you identify your affected parties, you can say, we're going to target these teachers to educate them on how to deal with Latino boys. Because that's part of our target population that we identified as one of the affected parties. Now, do you see why it's critical? But if you've also identified other affected parties, when the grantor comes back to you and says, well, we've already funded 2 organizations to deal with that affected party, are you willing to take on one of the others? You said, of course. We looked at all of them, and we can address another. How do I know that happens? Because we've done it. We've done it before. Yes, let's bring over here, please. Microphone right here. Now, she's coming, right? So we're talking about knowing who is affected, and then we'll talk about stating what the factors are right after you make your point there.
Sorry, I'm a data nerd. I'm not a great speaker.
Oh, you don't have to be.
I'll try to be succinct. I want to tie this question of affected populations back to an earlier question about some language that might be taboo in the current government landscape, specifically around homelessness, because I feel like homeless people have been unfairly vilified, but it does seem like maybe for municipal governments, I guess if that extends up to the state, that I think there's a lot of unfair vilification of homeless peoples. Yeah. But I work for the Bay Area Crisis Nursery, And it's sort of indirectly where we provide respite care, among other things, for families in crisis for their young children. So, so some of our service clientele are homeless. Is that a taboo word nowadays?
Yeah. I've watched the evolution of language around homelessness. And in some ways, those insiders who insist on dragging everyone along instantly with the changing language are part of the problem. I'll explain. So here in Contra Costa County, when you go to the health department and others, you never hear the word homeless. They use the unhoused, right? They use the term unhoused. And I suppose in some ways that's more of a PC term than homeless, right? Because it is broader in scope to include individuals who may not live on the street, but perhaps they're going from friend to friend here and there, they're unhoused. And so that's okay in some regards. But the problem with all of those words is that each comes with its own stigma invariably after a while, right? One of the populations that has the least open public support are those who we call homeless or unhoused. Those with mental health issues have more vociferous support. I've seen it at a board meeting. Whenever there's something related to mental health, behavioral health, people show up and they scream and they get attention. But nobody shows up and scream for those who have nowhere to live, right? Because we validate other things. We validate by giving tax breaks to those who can afford to plonk down $50,000 to buy a home in the Bay Area and then pay 3/4 of their disposable income every month just to stay in it. We validate those, but we don't validate, for example, the person who, if they were given a break, could afford the mortgage because their rent costs more than that, but, for whatever reason, student loans and the list goes on and on, they don't get validated. So the question is, how do we present them in a light that doesn't cause instant rejection? And what I've discovered is that very often you have to almost like create a new framing of the conversation. I was telling someone the other day that there is a type of qualitative research design called grounded theory. And I'm illustrating a point here. Pardon the academic reference, but can't help myself. It is who I am. Grounded theory actually explores a new theoretical framework for addressing a problem that is being researched. It suggests that all the existing theories do not adequately explain the details of the current situation. Homelessness is one of those, right? We have these anecdotal references to homelessness, talking about mental health, we're talking about those who are subjects of family divorce, family dissolution, and so on and so on. We talk about all these things that led to it, but we don't have a solid theoretical framework as to how it should be addressed, how it should be named, and how it should be addressed. So I'm afraid that we're at the point where we need a grounded theory approach, where we introduce new approaches and new concepts to dealing with that issue. It takes research to do it, though, right? It takes research to do it. It's not easy. It is not automatic. I get it, and I wish I had an easy answer for you. I'm just acknowledging that it is hard. It is absolutely hard, but somebody needs to begin to think about a different way of viewing this and different way of doing it. And the language that we're currently using, none of it is without its stuff that distracts from it, including unhoused as a word. So I wish I had an easier answer. But I wanted to stop and acknowledge that because it's something that I've struggled with in terms of how do we identify these services in the populations without immediately causing people to shut down. And that's one of them. Thank you for raising it. So now we're back to, and I said, by the way, if you remember, that the statement of need is the core of the proposal, right? This is what will take the most of your effort. And in some cases, this may be one of the longest parts of your proposal because it's research driven. You need to identify both quantitative and qualitative data if needed to make sure you make a case. So now we identified who is going to be served. You're going to need it for focusing your proposal. Now you're going to talk about the factors that contributed to the problems. Guess why? Because not only must you tell us who you're going to serve if you get the grant money, but what aspect of the problem you're going to address by serving who? The population. That's why we went through that process of saying what caused it. Well, if you said that the target population are going to be teachers because these teachers have little experience interacting with Latino boys who are teenagers, and we want to address that population, then you need to talk about what aspect of the problem you're going to address with those teachers. Right? Is it the lack of education? Is it, class material that just doesn't have any relevance? Is it that? Right? Or is it something else? Is it connecting the teachers with the parents who are themselves struggling with the challenges of raising teenagers, and they're not maybe as fully engaged? You have to figure out what the problem is. So my point being, the who and the what must be identified as a need, yes, on the one hand, but also as a means of correcting the issue. That's why this is central to the proposal. And if you don't get this right, the rest of the proposal is wrong. Am I making sense? Are you following? In the back, I see a hand, please. All right, so that's important.
In the statement of need, do you also have to mention who else is trying to solve this problem in the community and their aspect?
Yes, you absolutely do.
To show that you've already done your due diligence.
Absolutely.
And
coming to that in a slide or two.
Okay.
Oh yeah, very good point. Right? So who, what, now? How, based on what is researched and what is known, how this problem is going to be fixed. Right? So let me tell you this. If you say that the way to fix the problem with those young kids hanging out outside of school when they should be in school is to provide after-school basketball, I'm going to look at you like you just lost your mind. This is not an after-school problem. You may like after-school basketball, but what does this have to do with this issue? Unless you are making the case that during the after-school program, you are beginning to firm up their desire to actually be back in the classroom, and so that may ameliorate it. My point being, the more far removed you are from the direct problem you are addressing, the more you are required to do a tie-in. You will have to demonstrate from research that after-school sports programs actually impact children's appreciation or lack thereof for school. So you got to talk about what needs to be done, what is being done, and then what your organization is willing to do, and what else can be done. Now, you want to know what a good proposal does? A good proposal identifies the problem, who's affected, what are the factors that cause the problem, identifies what they think is a good solution, but also offers at least 2 other possible solutions. And this is where the vast majority of proposals fall down. See, a good proposal shows that you have general knowledge of the field and that you've considered alternatives, right? You don't go into a lot of detail on the alternatives that you did not choose, but you identify them. Shows that you have a knowledge of the big picture. You may say, for example, there was a similar problem like this. The research shows a similar problem like this in Seattle, Washington, and the school district there attempted to address it by doing such and such and such. However, I do not feel that the approach undertaken by the school district in Seattle is appropriate for us here in the city of Pittsburgh in California, and here's why. The different demographics, and you show the numbers, right? Population types, level of education, you show the difference. However, I feel that a program of this nature, though, would work here. So in other words, you're identifying 2 additional possible solutions in brief, no more than 1 paragraph, with an explanation as to why this is not going to work here. And do you want to know the trick behind why that works? Because in almost every case, when a problem is not a new problem, there will be other applicants to that same grant program that will propose one of those solutions that you said you're not going to choose. Yeah, we've actually had that. where we've had an issue and we had 3 different proposals and all took a different approach. It's not that one was better than the other. It's that you're making a case as to why you think the one you chose to expand on is the best or better choice for this particular demographic, right? What you don't ever want to do is say, well, Seattle has a program like that, but it's a dumb program. You know, it makes no sense at all, because the grantor that you're telling is a dumb program may have just funded it, and you're telling them they're dumb for funding it. It's that simple. It is really that simple. There's another thing too. You may find 2 programs out there, and you may say, this one doesn't work because of this, and this one doesn't work because of this, but my proposed solution is a combination of the 2. I'm going to extract the best qualities from program 1, the best qualities from program 2, and this is what we're going to do to make it relevant to this area. My point being, you don't have to create it out of nothing. You can take bits and pieces of other programs and create what's relevant for your target population, right? That's going to be important. It's a way of demonstrating that you have a good big picture idea, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. Now, we talked about your methods now of addressing the problem. Once you identify the core way you'll address the problem, you have a whole section that's called the methods section. Now, it's an interesting thing, because when you're writing a research proposal, there's a method section that deals with the methodology that you employ in doing the research and reporting the data. In proposal writing, the methods section is actually not a reference to the way you collect the data, but a reference to how you plan to address the problem. So now you're going to get into a very detailed, this is another section of your proposal that describes in details all the activities that you will do to address some of these issues. Here's where you begin to talk about, we're going to have this many classes once a week at this location, the whole works, right? We're going to make sure that we provide these classes. We're going to make sure we provide bus tickets to get people over there. Whatever it is, you need to get in detail what will be done to achieve the desired results. You may say, well, that sounds like a lot of detail. Yes, it is. And there's a reason why. Because there's another part of the proposal which has to do with your logic model and has to do with the goals, objectives, outcomes, and impacts that you will need to put this data in. See, with a proposal, as you are writing as you go along, each part feeds in with a measure of redundancy into the other parts that come. So if you do the earlier parts right, the further you go along, the easier it gets. It is really that simple. If you don't take your time to do this right, when you get to the goals, objectives, outcomes, impact section, you're going to be struggling to figure out, what do I put in here? Well, if you've done this already, it's in there. If you, for example, will say, we will have classes twice per week at the Ambrose Center, and we will have 20 kids in each class. When it comes to your outcomes, you will list classes twice per week at the Ambrose Center, 20 kids in each class. Pretty straightforward. But if you didn't do it here, it's more difficult as you move forward. We talk about make sure your methods are realistic, sure that they can really work. And this is the one we just talked about, the third bullet point. Make sure that you have chosen an activity over others, right? We talked about that. You're going to choose maybe 3 of them and say, we're going to use this one, we won't use the others, by showing your knowledge of the bigger picture. And then, of course, there's a timetable with a logic model, excuse me, which we will talk about. Next, I want to talk about the goals, objectives, outcomes, impacts. This is another major area. Someone asked me on the break earlier if there should be a closer look at an organization's mission statement before you undertake this type of writing. And the answer is yes. Because the goals can be equated to the mission statement in terms of how general they are. Now, that may sound a little different from what you've seen online, because when you look online, you see a statement, SMART goals. We'll talk about that momentarily. And it's everywhere. Said, oh yeah, everybody teaches you ought to have SMART goals. That's not true. Goals are not what's smart. It's outcomes that are meant to be smart. And I'll explain the difference momentarily. Goals are by nature meant to be sweeping, broad generalities. Case in point, let me give you a goal. You can say, one of the goals, and I'm going to just, let's just pick an organization. One of the goals of the Crisis Center is to reduce the incidence of homelessness among women with young children. That's a broad goal, right? But it talks about what you aim to achieve. But that could also sound like the mission of the organization, the reduction of homelessness among women with young children, birth to 5, right? That's the goal. It just talks about reduction. What it does not talk about is by how much. That later on comes in outcomes, because outcomes are by nature measurable, goals are by nature broad. Keep that in mind. So when people talk about SMART goals, they don't know what they're talking about. Bottom line, right? I know you've been taught it, and I know when you look online, that's all you see, but I can assure you, right? Goals, objectives, outcomes, let me just show you in a moment how this is supposed to play out. So the goal statement provides you a reason for being. The programmatic statement of purpose, why your organization exists. Here is a sample goal statement that has not been developed. I deliberately kind of made up one that is kind of dubious. The Bay Area Center for Youth Advancement desires to help children remain in school so they may graduate and go on to lead productive lives. It's not bad, it's just not developed. Look at a more developed version of the same goal statement. The Bay Area Center for Youth Advancement School Smarts program will focus on reducing truancy among 10th, 11th, and 12th graders at Martin Luther King Jr. High School. Now notice the language, there's a word there, reducing of a particular thing, truancy, and where it's taking place. The program will focus on the students, their teachers, and their parents, providing them with specific tools for dealing with the issues that ultimately contribute to truancy. The program will run for 1 year, then be re-evaluated. That's a rich goal statement. That's a rich goal statement, right? And that's an important one. So it should be 3 to 5 sentences, relatively short. Think about it as providing your ideas in about 20 to 30 seconds. It's a short thing, right? Indicates importance, and it talks about how the project is to be implemented. Now, under goals, we have objectives. Objectives are not a separate category of information. They are supportive of goals. Right? So if you have a goal here, the objectives will be the next level of things you do in support of that goal. And look at it here as I've indicated on the screen. I put 2 objectives. Objective number 1. During the months of July and August, staff will conduct outreach through text messaging, email, and print correspondence to parents and students. Notice, we're still not talking how much outreach they're going to do. They're just going to do it. It's simply, the objectives simply explain in a little finer detail what the goal is going to accomplish. Look at the next objective on the far right. During the months of September, October, staff will introduce students to the diversion program, including the box collection. Now we get to outcomes, and that's what's supposed to be SMART. And I'll show you how the outcomes are different. When we talk about SMART, we mean specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and there's one important element that most people miss in many proposals, time-bound. The time frame in which what you're saying you will do will be done. That's one of the specific distinguishing marks of outcome statements. So let's take a look at some of this. And I want to actually go back a little bit, because when we talk about outcomes, I'll give you an outcome. And I'll give you an outcome by going back to one of the goals here. And it says, objective number 1, during the months of July and August, staff will conduct outreach through SMS, email, print, and correspondence to parents and students. What would an outcome be for that? An outcome could be, by July 30th, staff will reach out via text messaging and email to approximately 130 families. What have I done? I've introduced a time element. I've said it'll be done by July 30th, and I've said how much we will do. 130 families, specific number. So it is SMART, it is measurable, right? And most importantly, it is time bound. It tells when this is to be accomplished. And here's the trick about this. The goals, objectives, outcomes, impacts will later go into the logic model. Remember what I said about writing a proposal? Everything you do fills out the next section. So if your statement of need is bad, it becomes a rippling effect that everything else gets harder to do. So you always begin by making sure that statement of need is workable. Look at objective number 2 on the far right. During the months of September and October, staff will introduce students to the diversion program, right? Including the box collection. You can say, as an outcome, a measurable outcome for this, you can say, between September 20th and October 31st, right? Staff will introduce 100 children to this particular program by doing XXX, right, in 2 class meetings per week. Now I'm introducing again specific numbers to indicate measurability, and I'm talking by when it will be done. That helps you to create the timeline of what you're actually presenting. So goals are the broad areas of what you aim to accomplish. The objectives are simply more descriptions of the goal, and then you get to outcomes, which are the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound elements. Now, let me say this. There's one problem with what I just gave you, though. All services cannot be measured quantitatively. And every sample I gave you so far gave a number associated with it. Well, so you're providing services for young children on the autism spectrum, and you're trying to build social interaction levels among those children. So children on the spectrum, particularly young children, tend to play well alone. They don't necessarily want to interact with their peers their age, right? And so if your purpose in your program is to get funding to help children on the spectrum develop those social skills, how do you measure that and how do you write that in an outcome? You can say, the children being served in this program will show increase in their number of interactions with their peers as indicated by, and you can write the description. Right? My point is, and the reason why I'm saying this, is that I don't want to give the impression that every service you provide can be described quantitatively, because it cannot. Not in social services, not in human services. Affection and the ability to interact with people often can't be quantified. And that's something that's important. All right? I have a son who is on the autism spectrum, and so these things that I'm talking about here, please, for a moment, don't think I'm just grabbing out of thin air. I'm talking experientially. Everything I do in life these days, at my age, is experiential. Bottom line. Right? So those things are valuable to me, and I understand how they work, and I understand the challenges. And by the way, it's so different because this was not the me 30, 20 years ago. That was a different me who understood it in theory, but not necessarily in practice. Right? So keep in mind that all of the services that we provide, right, in human services may not be quantifiable, so your statement must reflect that. Don't be forced into putting a number on something that cannot be measured quantitatively. You have to find ways more to describe it. Now, we mentioned impact statements. The federal government many years ago started asking, what difference does it make? You're asking us for money year after year. We're giving you this money year after year to do this. What difference does it make? And by the way, most people struggle to come up with impact statements because they confuse impacts with outcomes. Impacts are not like outcomes in that outcomes are focused on what you will deliver and how much of it you will deliver and by when you will deliver it. Impact statements say, this is how the client's lives will change after we've delivered these services. So if you're running a soup kitchen from the church and you're feeding 300 people per month. That's an outcome. The target is 300 people per month will come to the church kitchen, and you'll give them something to eat, and you will give them you get a chance to get a shower. Those are good numbers. But the question is, what difference does it make? How does it change their lives as a result? Right? How does it change their lives? Now, what an impact statement will be as a result of the services that we provide. Family stability will be achieved. And by having stable families, we can look for more longevity in terms of people's overall life, their sense of well-being, children being in school, less dependence in the community, less likelihood to find a job because you can shower and put on some fresh clothes. Those are impact statements, and those are the ones we need to start thinking more about. How are we changing people's lives? It is so easy to list the things that you're doing without ever stopping to think, and what difference is that list making? Of all the things I'm doing, what difference is it making? That's what we're asking you. We're looking for impact statements. Tell us that if we keep giving you this money year after year after year, something is happening. Tell us, Yvette, that we're actually reducing recidivism. That by putting this money in, people are not turning around going back to prison. Right? That's what we want to see. Don't just simply say, I provided 100 workshops for formerly incarcerated. So what? What difference does your 100 workshop make? That's what we're talking about when we talk about impacts, right? So it's very important to have those impact statements in there. And my timing is like, oh my goodness, it must come with age. Oh my gosh. I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but it's like a fine wine, man. I was like 5 minutes ahead of target, yeah. Questions, comments before we take our break in 5 minutes? Let's do it. By the way, when we come back this afternoon, just so you know, that's just the core of the proposal. That's just the statement of need. There's still more to be done. We haven't talked about logic models. We haven't talked about budgeting. All of that comes in the afternoon. So we do have quite a bit ways to go. So just hang in there. And you would do yourself a disservice if you leave and miss the afternoon, because I'm afraid you would have missed a couple critical components as well. Yes, go right ahead.
I don't have a statement. I just want to say something to you. I read about a couple of years ago where the school had a lot of homeless children, and they had a problem. The problem was that the kids was always dirty. Their clothes was always dirty.
Yeah.
So they came up with a plan, got some kind of money, some kind of way, and put some washers and dryers in the school system, where that after school on certain days, the kids can bring their clothes and wash and have clean clothes to come to school. And it made a difference in them wanting to come to school because they came to school in clean clothes. So that's what they did to solve that one problem.
Yeah. Yeah, good example, because these things have impacts that really do make a difference. We funded a program, Supervisor, a few years back, and since that time, the state now funds it. They discovered that a lot of college kids, including those who go to Los Medanos and to the other colleges in the district, a lot of the students actually didn't know where their next meal was coming from. So out of the Keller Canyon Mitigation Fund, we funded a program that provided food for college kids. Now, we always think about K through 12. We never think, well, you know, in community colleges, they need food too. You'd be amazed how many kids didn't know where the next meal was coming from. The program was so successful, and by the way, we did not know about it. You know what we found out? We had a grant writing workshop like this on the campus, and we put our food outside, and we saw a bunch of kids lurking around, and we were like, why are they here? And finally, one of them mustered up enough courage and say, can we have some of that? I don't have any lunch. And I was so taken aback by it. I'm like, whoa, these kids, they really need food. And so we actually approached the college district and we funded it for a few years, and then the state finally caught up to the problem long after we did in Contra Costa County. Now the state provides money to the college for it. So yeah, there are all kinds of issues like that that you may not be aware of that really we do need to tackle. Yes?
Hola. Really quick, I'm timing myself. You said earlier, there was someone earlier who said something about being shy, and
Yes.
you mentioned
Right.
having to drop your proposal down to 9 words. I just have a recommendation for those of you who, before you go to a grantor or to speak, go to city council meetings, go to the board of supervisors meeting,
Yeah.
do some public comments,
Yeah.
time yourself, learn how to speak in 1 or 2 minute spurts.
Yeah.
Because I'm an elected official, it's very easy. Because they don't give you very much time. We don't give you very much time. Learn to speak in 90 seconds. Learn to speak in 2 minutes, and that will get you prepared. But especially if shyness, though we appreciate it, its brevity is even better, but learn to speak in public. Go to school board meetings, go to any of these meetings, learn to speak in public because you're going to need it for this. And guess what? I still have 58 seconds left. I timed myself for 2 minutes. Gracias. Es todo.
Thank you. Very good idea. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments before we take our break? Yes, in the back.
Just to go back to the who, what, how thing that you presented, one of the things that I wonder, does it help or contribute to offer with the who this affects, to also think about, generationally who it affects? Does that benefit, like, what 2 generations, 3 generations, environment, health, education? Does that help adding that into
Yes, it does. It does. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I certainly did not. When we talk about who the affected party is, it does not have to be who is affected right here and now. It can be generational effects. It absolutely can be. And let's face it, for those of us from communities of color, and for those of us, who, of course, are from otherwise marginalized communities, that some of the damage with which we now live were initiated decades ago. And you can argue centuries ago. Right? But it also is a lesson to those of us who are parents that we need to be aware of what we do today because we may be doing some generational damage to our children and grandchildren that we need to be conscious of. Right? So, I haven't heard that in a long time. Amen, sister. Right?
So I have a second aspect of that question. Thank you. Thanks for saying that's important. And it is, right? These generational things, they build, and then we feel the repercussions. In that context, when we're giving the statistics and the research for, how we're going to ameliorate the problem, can we, I don't want to say fabricate, but can we project research and data forwards to prove our problem is going to create future generational, and will that be accepted?
Of course, it's basically suggesting that if this were to happen and continue along this way, these are the likely results. This is what likely to be the outcome. Here's the other piece, and I'm glad you raised this because after this we'll take our break. I always say to research methods students, when you have a specific problem you're trying to do research on, and the literature just does not adequately cover it, start by reasoning from research that is general to your more specific problem. So, for example, you may not find research that tells you what will happen to Bay Point kids who are in the Mount Diablo Unified School District, but you will find research that talks about the impacts of the public school system on Latino kids elsewhere. So reach to that data and then narrow it down to make it relevant to your local population. You may not find research about the results of our current K-12 system on African American males. You may not find a lot of research in it, but you can talk generally about how education that is not tailored for specific ethnic, racial, marginalized groups, how education impacts them when it is not properly tailored, and then narrow it to the specific. You reason from the general data that's available to the specific circumstances in which you are actually providing your program. Lunchtime.